she said. I'll pretend this never happened. I just smiled and whispered, until next time. The first day it happened, I didn't even realize how much it would linger in my mind. It was one of those ordinary mornings where I thought I was prepared for everything, books packed, coffee in hand, shoes tied just right. And yet nothing could have prepared me for the brief collision of worlds that would catch me so completely off guard. She walked into the classroom with her usual quiet confidence, the kind of presence that doesn't demand attention but makes it impossible not to notice. I was immediately struck by the subtle grace in her movements, the way her scarf fluttered just slightly when she turned, or the soft rhythm of her steps across the floor. My chest tightened, not with nervousness exactly, but with the awareness of being in the orbit of someone who seemed both untouchably composed and surprisingly human all at once. The moment itself was absurdly small, almost laughable. I had been fumbling with a stack of papers, trying to arrange them neatly before she noticed me, and, of course, my hand slipped. A book toppled to the floor with a dramatic thud. My cheeks burned as I bent down to pick it up, only to feel her hand brush mine. The contact was brief, almost accidental, yet the warmth of her palm lingered far longer in my mind than it did on my skin. "Careful," she said, her voice low, soft, yet threaded with a subtle amusement. She didn't scold. There was no judgment, only that quiet awareness that made the world feel just slightly smaller, as if it existed only for that instant. I glanced up, and our eyes met. I could see the faintest twitch of a smile at the corner of her lips, a hesitation in her gaze that mirrored the sudden, sharp awareness of my own heartbeat. It was the kind of moment that seems like nothing in real time but leaves a permanent echo afterward. I wanted to apologize, explain myself, make it all less awkward, but the words caught in my throat. I just looked at her, felt the subtle pulse of life in the brush of her fingers, and somehow, it felt like a secret shared between us. Then, almost teasingly, she said the words that would echo in my mind for days. "I'll pretend this never happened." Her tone was light, airy, almost casual, but the unspoken weight beneath it was palpable. It was not a dismissal. It was an acknowledgement, a tiny thread of connection that she had chosen to leave dangling between us. I smiled, just a fraction, not wanting to overplay it, and in my mind, or perhaps just barely above a whisper, I replied, "Until next time." I don't think she heard it, and maybe it wasn't meant to be heard. But in that moment, it felt like a promise, a tether between our worlds that neither of us fully understood yet. After that, the classroom seemed different. Every glance, every small gesture, every accidental brush of hands carried a new weight. I didn't know then how many times that single, fleeting contact would replay in my mind. I only knew that I wanted it to happen again, carefully, quietly, in the spaces between words and books and responsibilities. And I had a feeling she might, too. After that first accidental touch, nothing seemed ordinary anymore. Every day in her presence felt like a subtle test of awareness and restraint. I caught myself noticing things I had never consciously observed before. The way her hair caught the light when she turned her head, the soft crease at the corner of her eyes when she smiled, the slight shift in her posture as she leaned over a desk to explain something. It was as if I were seeing her for the first time, layer by layer, and I couldn't stop paying attention. At first, I tried to convince myself that I was imagining it. A fleeting glance here, a brief touch there, surely nothing meant more than what it appeared to. But the moments kept coming, tiny and undeniable. She would brush past me in the hallway, her shoulder barely grazing mine, and I'd feel a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with temperature. Or in class, she'd hand back papers with her fingers lingering a fraction too long on mine, and my mind would spiral with possibilities while the rest of the room remained oblivious. It wasn't just physical, though. Her voice had become something I unconsciously waited for. When she leaned close to explain a concept, there was a subtle rhythm to the words, a softness that invited listening beyond comprehension. Her laughter, rare and quiet, resonated differently than the noise of the classroom. It felt like a secret shared only with me, and each note pulled me further into an orbit I couldn't, and didn't want to, escape. I found myself analyzing every glance she gave, every fleeting expression. Was that pause in her eyes curiosity? Amusement? Recognition of the tension neither of us would dare speak aloud? The uncertainty was intoxicating, and I began to savor it. Every small brush of our hands, every shared smile, was a thread weaving a quiet intimacy I hadn't anticipated but couldn't resist. There was one particular afternoon that stays vivid in my memory. We were both leaning over a large textbook, trying to solve a problem together. Our shoulders touched, and I could feel the warmth radiating from her as our heads drew slightly closer. Her hair brushed my cheek when she leaned in to point at a line in the book, and I caught a faint scent, something comforting, familiar, almost like vanilla with a trace of jasmine. My heart skipped, yet the moment was delicate, balanced on the edge between casual and profound. And then came the glance. She looked up at me, her eyes meeting mine with a mixture of amusement and something unspoken, something that made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't expected. Neither of us said a word, yet the silence spoke volumes. There was recognition there, a subtle acknowledgement that we were both aware of the tension growing between us, aware of the magnetic pull in these little, stolen moments. By the time class ended, I realized I had been holding my breath for the past 10 minutes. I didn't want to break the spell with words. So I left it suspended, a quiet promise without articulation, a lingering warmth that would carry me until we met again. And as I walked away, I couldn't stop replaying her glance, over and over, silently whispering to myself, until next time. It wasn't planned, not in the slightest. Somehow, one quiet afternoon, we found ourselves alone in the library, the world outside reduced to a distant hum. The classroom had its rules, its boundaries, but here, away from eyes and expectations, the space between us felt smaller, more intimate, and charged in ways neither of us had dared explore before. We were sitting across from each other at a long wooden table, books scattered between us, pens tapping in quiet rhythm. I had thought I was there simply to finish an assignment, to keep my focus on the work at hand. But the moment I caught her watching me, a subtle expression on her face, a mixture of curiosity and warmth, I realized this was no ordinary study session. We started talking about the assignment at first. Her voice was soft, measured, yet it carried a rhythm that drew my attention beyond the words. When she explained a concept, she leaned slightly toward me, her shoulder brushing mine as she gestured toward the page. The touch was brief, fleeting, almost accidental, but it left a trail, a quiet warmth that lingered in my mind long after the contact ended. And then, as the minutes passed, the conversation shifted. I found myself sharing small details about my life, my uncertainties, the little things I rarely admitted aloud. In return, she offered stories from her own life, fragments of past experiences told with gentle humor and quiet reflection. I noticed the way her eyes softened when she spoke of something personal, how her hands rested lightly on the table, fingers tracing patterns absent-mindedly. There was trust in her gestures, an unspoken invitation for me to be honest, to let down the walls I had so carefully built around myself. At one point, she paused, letting silence hang between us. The quiet was not uncomfortable. It was full, almost tangible. I could feel her presence in the space next to me, the subtle warmth radiating from her body, the faint scent of her perfume, something soft and lingering like vanilla and sandalwood combined. The air felt charged yet calm, as if time itself had slowed to let this moment stretch indefinitely. Our hands nearly touched while reaching for the same pen, a brush so fleeting it could have been imagined, yet I felt it profoundly. My chest tightened, and I caught myself staring at her, not wanting to look away, afraid that breaking eye contact would shatter something fragile but beautiful. And she didn't pull back. She simply smiled, that gentle, knowing smile that seemed to hold a secret meant only for us. The final words she spoke before we left the library were playful, almost teasing, yet weighted with unspoken meaning. "I suppose some things we'll just have to pretend." It mirrored the line she had said the first day, the one that had lodged itself in my thoughts like a tiny spark. My response, whispered in thought, was immediate. "Until next time." As I walked away that day, I realized something important. The connection between us wasn't just attraction, it was trust, curiosity, and a sense of emotional intimacy that neither of us had yet fully acknowledged. And the thought of seeing her again, of feeling that quiet closeness, left a warmth inside me that I knew would linger, quietly, until the next stolen moment. It was during one of those ordinary afternoons that the ordinary itself began to feel extraordinary. We were assigned a joint project, a seemingly simple task that would require us to spend hours in the same space. At first, I thought it would be purely academic, nothing more than notes and charts and deadlines. But from the moment we sat across from each other, the air between us carried a subtle charge that made every small interaction feel significant. We were hunched over a table in the study room, papers spread like a small battlefield, each of us focused on different aspects of the assignment. But focus was nearly impossible. Every time I glanced up, I caught her looking at me, her eyes lingering just a beat longer than necessary, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her lips. My own heart betrayed me, thudding in a rhythm that seemed louder than it should be. Our shoulders brushed at first accidentally, an innocent shift to reach for a pen, but the warmth radiating from her body made the contact feel like more than mere coincidence. I was acutely aware of her presence, the subtle movement of her hair as she leaned forward, the delicate scent that drifted toward me as she leaned close to point at a line on the paper. Each gesture, each glance, carried a weight that neither of us spoke aloud but both of us recognized. As we worked side by side, our conversation drifted from the project to quieter, personal topics. She laughed softly at my jokes, her voice wrapping around me like a familiar melody, and I noticed the way she adjusted her posture when our knees brushed under the table. It was a brief touch, barely noticeable, yet it left a warmth lingering long after the moment had passed. I found myself consciously avoiding looking away, afraid that breaking eye contact might dissolve the unspoken connection forming between us. Then came the moment I had secretly anticipated, though I would never have admitted it. We both reached for the same sheet of paper at the same time, our hands meeting midair. Our fingers lingered, brushing over one another gently. I felt the pulse of her warmth, subtle and grounding, and the simple proximity sent a ripple of awareness through me, quiet but undeniable. She didn't pull back immediately. Instead, her eyes met mine with that same fleeting, unreadable expression, a mixture of amusement, curiosity, and something else I couldn't yet name. I realized then that this wasn't just a project. This was a dance of small gestures, a careful choreography of glances, touches, and shared space. Every accidental brush, every soft laugh, every moment of leaning slightly closer seemed to stretch time, making the ordinary feel extraordinary. I could feel my own emotions taut, balanced delicately between desire and restraint, curiosity and propriety. When the session finally ended, we packed up our things slowly, either of us breaking the spell too quickly. Her glance lingered at me as she gathered her papers, that soft, knowing smile still in place, and I felt a quiet promise pass between us. Words weren't necessary. The subtle, shared intimacy of the afternoon spoke louder than anything either of us could say. And as I left the study room, the memory of her warmth, her proximity, and that gentle brush of fingers followed me, echoing silently, until next time. After the shared afternoons and lingering touches, I began to notice a strange heaviness settling in my chest. It wasn't her fault, not at all. The warmth, the laughter, the small gestures, they were intoxicating, but they carried a weight I couldn't ignore. Every time our hands brushed or our shoulders met, a flutter ran through me, followed immediately by a tightening knot of doubt. What if I was reading too much into her kindness? What if the age difference, the boundaries of our roles, made all of this impossible? I started holding myself back. In class, I sat a little straighter, keeping my distance. I forced my mind to focus on the lessons, the assignments, the mundane tasks that could distract me from noticing her too closely. But my body betrayed me. Even from across the room, I could feel the magnetic pull of her presence. The soft sway of her hair, the curve of her lips when she smiled at another student, the gentle tone of her voice, it all lingered like a fragrance I couldn't escape, and I realized I didn't want to. She noticed, of course. There was a quiet moment one afternoon when we were alone in the classroom, her eyes briefly searching mine as if she sensed my internal struggle. My hesitation hung in the air like a tangible thing, heavy but fragile, and I could feel her understanding without her needing to speak. She didn't confront me, she didn't judge. Instead, she let the moment stretch, letting silence communicate what words never could. The first real test came during a group discussion where I had to speak up in front of the class. Normally, I might have faltered, but her presence grounded me, even as it unsettled me. Our eyes met across the room, and I could feel the familiar warmth radiating toward me. It was comforting and confusing all at once. I wanted to run my hand along hers, to close the space between us, but I knew that hesitation was the only thing keeping this delicate balance intact. After class, I lingered near her desk longer than necessary, pretending to gather my things slowly. She looked up at me, eyes soft, as if reading my inner turmoil. There was a faint smile on her lips, one that carried reassurance and acknowledgement. For a fleeting moment, I imagined reaching for her hand, letting the tension dissolve into something tangible, but I stopped. Not out of fear of her rejection, but because part of me wanted to prove I could respect her space, respect the boundary that existed between us, even as my heart ached to ignore it. Walking away that day, I felt both relief and regret. Relief for controlling the impulse that could complicate everything, regret for missing the chance to connect more deeply. Yet, beneath it all, a small, stubborn spark refused to die, the quiet insistence that our connection, fleeting and fragile as it might be, was real. It was honest, human, and undeniably compelling. That night, in the quiet of my room, I replayed her glance, the brush of her shoulder, the subtle warmth of her presence. I realized that hesitation wasn't just a barrier, it was a measure of how much this mattered. And I knew, somewhere deep inside, that no matter the doubts, the tension, or the uncertainty, I would find a way to reach her again. Until next time. The connection between us had grown beyond words, beyond the small gestures and lingering touches. By now, I had learned that the moments that truly mattered were the quiet ones, those fleeting seconds when our eyes met, when our hands brushed, or when a subtle shift in posture conveyed more than 1,000 words ever could. That afternoon, it became undeniable. Our understanding of each other had reached a level that was almost frightening in its intensity. We were walking along the campus courtyard, the late afternoon sun casting long, warm shadows across the paths. The air carried a faint scent of autumn leaves and freshly mown grass, a simple backdrop that somehow made everything feel intimate. We didn't speak much. The conversation had dwindled to practicalities about an upcoming project, yet the silence between us was charged, full of unspoken acknowledgement. Each step beside her felt heavier than it should, weighed with awareness and anticipation. We paused near a quiet bench, and for the first time in a long while, our movements slowed intentionally. I felt her presence beside me like a quiet tide, constant and reassuring, and I realized that the hesitation I had felt in previous days was melting into something warmer, something I couldn't yet name, but that filled me entirely. I could sense her attention in every small gesture, the soft brush of her sleeve against my arm, the way she adjusted her hair, the subtle tilt of her head as she looked at me. Our hands brushed again, this time not accidental, but tentative. Neither of us pulled back immediately. The contact was fleeting, yet it radiated warmth, a silent confirmation that we were both aware of the tension, the closeness, and the unspoken desire that had been building between us for weeks. I could feel my pulse quicken, my chest tightening, yet the moment wasn't uncomfortable. It was grounding, reassuring, a shared understanding that this connection was mutual, even if it had yet to be verbalized. Her eyes met mine, and I realized she was waiting, not for words, but for recognition, for acknowledgement that we were both aware of the fragile intimacy forming between us. I didn't need to speak. My thoughts, my attention, and the careful, deliberate way I let my hand linger near hers communicated more than any sentence ever could. She responded with a subtle smile, a quiet exhale, a glance that held both amusement and something deeper, something intimate that felt like it had always existed between us. We stayed there, side by side, sharing that quiet space, letting the world fall away. The connection wasn't rushed, it wasn't desperate, it was slow, deliberate, and filled with the kind of awareness that only comes when two people are truly attuned to each other. I felt a profound sense of trust in that silence, A realization that our bond was built on more than fleeting attraction. It was on attention, care, and the quiet courage to exist alongside each other without forcing words where they weren't needed. As the sun dipped lower, casting golden light across her face, I felt a small, stubborn spark of certainty. This connection, delicate and restrained as it was real. It was ours. And in the quiet, the unspoken agreement hung between us. No declarations yet, no overt confessions, just a promise carried in the weight of shared silence. Until next time. The day had arrived with no fanfare, yet everything about it felt significant. We had spent weeks in the delicate dance of stolen glances, fleeting touches, and quiet understanding, and now, the tension between us had evolved into something quieter, steadier, a warm certainty neither of us needed to speak aloud. We were meeting in the familiar study room, the same place that had hosted so many of our silent confessions. The room felt smaller somehow, more intimate, as if the walls themselves recognized the bond that had formed. Sunlight poured through the windows, casting long, golden shafts across the wooden table, illuminating the small imperfections in the floorboards and the scattered textbooks, each detail grounding me in the reality of the moment. She was already there when I arrived, standing by the window, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of the table. Her posture was relaxed yet poised, exuding the quiet confidence that had captivated me from the start. When she looked up and caught my eyes, her smile was gentle, knowing, and entirely without pretense. It was the smile that had haunted my thoughts, the one that carried warmth, trust, and the quiet promise of more to come. As I approached, our hands brushed briefly, lingering just long enough for me to feel the subtle warmth radiating from her skin. The touch was soft, deliberate yet natural, a silent acknowledgement of everything that had passed between us, the shared study sessions, the laughter, the fleeting moments of closeness that had built this fragile intimacy. My chest tightened with the familiar flutter, a sensation that had become a comforting rhythm in its own right. We sat together, side by side, working through the final details of the project, but the work had become secondary. Every small gesture, the way she leaned closer to point at a line in the notebook, the soft brush of her sleeve against my arm, the quiet exhale of her breath, spoke volumes. I noticed her eyes on me more often than not, those quiet, attentive glances that had become our secret language, filled with understanding and subtle affection. At one point, she reached over to adjust my pen, her hand brushing mine in a way that lingered slightly longer than necessary. The warmth of her touch, the softness of her presence, made my heartbeat stutter in a rhythm I had come to recognize and cherish. There was no urgency, no pressure, just a gentle, deliberate closeness that allowed our bond to breathe, to exist fully in the space between words. When the work was done, we lingered, either ready to leave. She offered a quiet, lingering smile and rested her hand near mine, fingertips almost touching. I mirrored her gesture, letting our hands hover, close but not forced, a final affirmation of the trust, connection, and subtle desire that had grown between us. As we stood to leave, she gave a soft, knowing nod and a small, affectionate glance. There was no need for grand declarations. Our story had been written in glances, touches, and shared silences. And as I walked away, a quiet certainty settled in my chest. The bond we had nurtured, delicate and restrained, was real, enduring, and ours. And just as it had started, it ended with a private, internal promise, a whisper of continuity that lingered in the heart. Until next time.